Hey everyone, it's Forrest, and welcome back to another episode of 1000 Seconds. I'm really excited for today's conversation, and we're also trying something just a little different. I actually have two guests joining me today. Sue Williams, who is the current CEO at the South Carolina Children's Trust, and Mike Leach, who is the current director at the South Carolina Department of Social Services. I can't think of very many people across this country that know more, care more, and invest more time and effort and energy in caring for children and families than Sue and Mike. I think you'll probably share that opinion after you listen to this episode. But an important programming note before we get started. In between the time that we recorded this conversation and now, Mike has announced that he'll be stepping down at the Department of Social Services at the end of the year. So I want to take just a moment to say thank you to Mike for all that he has done. In his resignation letter, he wrote, quote, "I believe I was destined to be here in South Carolina at DSS during a chaotic time when people needed help more than ever." Mike, I agree. And this state and all of the people in it, especially the children and families, are better because of the 5 years you spent here. Thank you for everything you did. And I join many other people in saying we can't wait to see what's next for you. With that, let's go ahead and get started.
Mike, Sue, welcome to 1000 Seconds. So glad to have you both here. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Forrest.
Thanks, Forrest. Good to be here.
I'm going to do just a little bit of an intro. I've got my notes here in case I need to cheat, but I think I've got most of this from our past work together. But just a little quick bio for each of you in case any of our listeners aren't as familiar with the two of you as I am as friends and colleagues. Sue, my guess is that most people listening here recognize you as the director and founder, actually, of the Children's Trust Fund of South Carolina. That 2007, if I've got that correct. So
Correct.
we're
Yes.
approaching 20 years on the trend line.
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
not as many people would recognize that you were also leading the group that founded Adventure Children's Museum back in the day.
Back in the day, once upon a time.
It's amazing. It's an amazing part of your career trajectory and journey along the way. Sue has been awarded the Order of the Palmetto, the 2019 Children's Bureau Champion Award. She serves on the board of South Carolina First Steps, South Carolina Office of Rural Health, Adventure. As we mentioned, has founded two major players in the child and family space in South Carolina, Adventure Children's Museum and Children's Trust. The short version of Sue's bio, all things lifting up children and families, Sue has been involved in and continues to be involved in South Carolina. Sue, glad to have you here.
Thanks, Forrest. And just a note of clarification, we were actually, the Children's Trust was created in 1984 by the General Assembly and went for about 10 years. And then it went on hiatus in the closet for about 10 years and did nothing, waiting for a while. And so in 2007, when I came around, it was actually the product of a merge. Our boards
when the merger
to
happened.
merge organizations, which is very unheard of in the nonprofit sector, but I was glad to be part of that.
For sure. Absolutely. Sue, do you remember by chance how we met?
I don't remember exactly. I think it was during your tenure with Together SC way back in the day. But I think when we really started working together was when we had this grant from the federal government for, was it pregnant, already pregnant or parenting teens?
Yeah, the Pregnancy Assistance Fund. That's right.
Yes. And that was when we were like, oh gosh, we should work together. And then we brought in the fathers because that was during the Obama administration, and that was when they were putting fathers on everything. So it was like la 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 and fathers
and fathers
and la 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 and fathers.
Right. Yeah, fair.
And so we're like,
right.
You and I looked at each other like, what do we do with that?
yeah, no, that's right. That's a good memory. I would agree that that's probably where the paths first crossed. And Mike Leach currently serves as the state director of the South Carolina Department of Social Services. If my math is correct, just over 5 years, maybe celebrated the 5th anniversary in April, I think. So that gave you almost a full year of work pre-COVID, right? Had almost a full 12 months. Prior to that, 10 years at the Tennessee Department of Children's Services, lots of different roles there. and prior to that at Vanderbilt. Do I have that path correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And the most important part of your bio, which I can't find anywhere online, but I know this from Facebook and social media, is that you're a baseball dad.
I am, and it's interesting because that's a sport that I was never good at and had no interest. And I was a I was a track guy, cross country guy, and
Oh, wow.
then now my son loves baseball, and I spend my weekends at baseball fields.
That's awesome. Mike, thanks for being here. Do you remember how we first met?
So it's interesting, Forrest. I know our conversations where I was headed to South Carolina while you were headed to Tennessee,
Yeah.
right? We pretty much crossed 40, I think, past.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
On 40 or 26. What are the other?
yeah,
We
one
probably
of
drove
those
past each
roads,
other.
right? I feel like we talked virtually probably more than, and one of the first times we met at a coffee shop in Cottontown, I think.
Right.
And just discussing future projects, what the vision looks like, those kinds of things. But
Yeah.
I honestly, like anything back around those COVID days, like my memory is,
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah.
That's fair.
Welcome to 1000 Seconds, a video series presented by 1000 Feathers and hosted by the firm's co-founder and president, Forrest Alton. In this first season, Forrest sits down with changemakers, leaders, and visionaries who are doing transformative work at the local, state, and national level. This series will give you a unique view and front row seat to bold and courageous conversations with people that Forrest has learned from and worked with along the way. So set your timers, 1000 Seconds starts now.
What's interesting and was really sort of heartwarming, for lack of a better term for me, doing some prep for this episode and going back through both of your bios and your work and, trying to remember some of these early days and past career stops for both of you along the way. You both, by any measure and any definition, have dedicated your entire career, your life's work, to lifting up and supporting children and families. I'd love to know if either of you have memory of a sort of aha moment, like, wow, this is it, and this is what I've been destined to do, or some moment in time on the career journey where you just knew, like, I'm gonna lock in here. This is what I've been meaning to do.
I do have that moment. So back in the day, I originally started in nursing school, and I was a nursing student, and you do the different rotations.
Yeah.
And my mom worked for an obstetrician at the time. She was the office manager accountant. And so I was in and around maternal health all the time and thought that's what I wanted to do. Even thought about maybe going to medical school myself, maybe becoming an obstetrician gynecologist, working very into women's health and innovative practices. And I remember I was so excited to start my OB rotation because I thought this was it. I've had my whole, growing up years with my mom and her work and all that. And the obstetrician she worked for happened to be a woman who was very cutting edge in her day and time. And so I was all in. And when I went to my first birth, I saw that baby born and the mom could have fallen off the table and I could not have cared less. I was all in, laser focused on that child. And I went, oh, I think I'm seeing something here. Maybe it's really more about the kids than the mom as I had thought. And so I tested that out, and that's really been my career ever since in many different venues, but all about the kids.
Oh, that's great. Mike, how about you? Is there a moment in time or one of these positions along the way you remember?
Yeah, no, it was even before work, really. It was, two things. My mom always said I'd be working with children like growing up, she could just tell, like, had that connection, right? But she was also a forensic sexual abuse professional. I saw her fight for children pretty much all my growing up, but I do remember in college, sociology of the family class. And I was the professor had written the textbook. I was just sort of mesmerized, right, about that. And at that point, it's still like, what are you going to do? And I realized that, I was going to head towards marriage and family therapy track, right? Head that direction. So that class, my mom already had seen it, but that class sort of, for me, really got me to see that is what I was interested in.
I love it. And we are all better for it, for both of you having these moments, right? These these moments in time or these observations of family or from past occupations come to present day, if you will, and even looking forward. How would you, I'd love to hear from both of you, how you would articulate or describe your vision for the future from now moving forward related to children and families. How would you articulate what your personal vision looks like?
I'll start.
Yeah, sure.
I think that the personal vision, again, for just sort of where I sit, would be that, are the children and families in South Carolina, I'm going to try to be succinct, are in a supportive environment, and have access to resources that promote their well-being, right, and success. And there's a lot of well-being factors within that, but as simple as that, they're in a safe, nurturing, supportive environment. And the things that go along with that are, in our role, is to make sure that they are updated best practice policies and programs that help enhance family support, right? Evidence-based practices, services and supports that prevent maltreatment and support family stability. Again, we talk about going upstream. This is very much, I think, what the future should look like for South Carolina, and making sure that all the communities and stakeholders also, have a belief that they're part of creating systems change that can benefit children and families. It's not just a government agency or one organization. It's going to take all of us to do that. So I think that probably just is what I think the vision is for me.
Right.
I couldn't agree more, Mike. I think that, we who have been in this field for a while have seen the evolution come from this idea of this family bubble, right? And back in the day when families lived very close together, grandma was down the street, and the expansion out west hadn't happened and people hadn't moved very far. There was this idea that family could stay together, that they could help one another, and they did from birth to death, and they were a family unit. And as the country changed, so did the evolution of how families exist. So now we have grandparents who are not close by helping with the newborn baby or giving grandma's advice to whatever, whether it's warranted or not, right? But there was always somebody around. Now grandma lives in California, the brother lives in Maine, and you live in South Carolina, and people don't have their village anymore. And some people are fortunate enough to be able to create a village around them, but some people aren't. And so we've had to evolve as a society and think about, and this is where I think we're going in that direction. But my vision is that we would be completely actualized to that, where we see those around us as our village, and we take care of our community, not just us and our own and our little family bubble, but those in our children's class, or the children down the street, or the kids across the street, that we all see each other. This is our American kids, not just our family kids.
I love it. I love it. I coming into this conversation and having had the opportunity to work with and interact with both of you for a long time, I knew a couple things. Number one, I knew we were all going to leave inspired and better for having this conversation. And number two, I knew that we could stretch this out for days if we wanted to. So I'm going to take a couple creative liberties as the host here and count all of that as our welcome and introduction to both of you. But the show is called 1000 Seconds. So now I do need to start the clock. And I'm going to start it over here, and I'm going to keep an eye on it. But we'll call all of that our introduction and dive in now together for 1000 seconds with each other. Those visions obviously line up really well. It's not a surprise that the two of you and your organizations have become good and strong partners in the space, right? But I'm also interested, sort of internal and external. It's one thing for leaders like yourselves to have a vision. It's another thing to be able to get people to rally behind that vision, to share that vision. Mike, you've got 4,000-ish employees.
4,600, right around now.
Across 46 counties. Sue, you don't have quite 4,000, but are growing and, in a more hybrid office environment. I mean, where everybody's not all together all the time or not even all located in Columbia. How do we make sure organizationally, or even extend that to our stakeholders, that others are able to share, rally behind the vision you have as leaders?
So I can start, and this goes back to my days with Adventure, when we were starting out and I had this idea and I said, well, it's got to be beyond me. I got to talk to some other people, and it's sharing that vision and being able to paint that picture of what you see. And I realized later, but hindsight is always 2020. What I could see so clearly in my head is this children's museum in Columbia was only in my head, but it was clear. And so you need to be able to articulate that vision in a way that people can see it with you. And fast forwarding to where I am now, and I count on my senior staff to remind me, because I see this vision so clearly of where children and families could be. And I get my staff to say, we have the sense of urgency. We need to be there on the prevention end of it. If not for us, then they're, going into the deep end of the system, and it's going to get all caught up in the courts, et cetera. So we've got to get out there. And my senior staff reminds me that the team needs to hear the vision again. That, we get so caught up in the day-to-day stuff that, it's the one task. I got this deadline by Friday, and I need to pull them back up. What is our ultimate goal? What is it we're all working towards? And remind them that we all have a sense of purpose for being here, and help paint that picture again when people are lost in the details of what the big picture is.
Yeah, that's great. Well said.
I would say, yeah, I mean, clear communication about the vision and the why, and you have to do it all the time, right?
Yes, way more than you think.
To Sue's point, you have to keep going back to that. Not that people don't, don't maybe are kind of working towards that anyway. But I think they need to make sure that they're hearing leadership promote the shared ownership of that vision, right? So it's just not me believing in it. It's me talking about it. It's me showing that I believe in it. It's talking about how you have some ownership in that vision. What does that look like? What is your part in that? Again, clear communication, just, constantly saying that, but then, talking about values, right? What are our core values? What are our shared goals? And that's internally, but then across organizations as well, right? What are we all trying to achieve that is similar? How do we help each other out? Do we, and the values behind that? You constantly have to share that stuff. You constantly have to talk about, care and compassion of families. And this work is hard. And it's hard on you as the professional, but it's hard on the family as well. And how we can work alongside each other with all of that. So, I mean, it's constantly engaging staff and professionals and organizations at all levels around this discussion, right? So that we're aligned, which is really hard to do. You'd think it'd be easy, but everybody, maybe has maybe a tiny bit different, either vision or mission, right, in their own space, and they're all trying to accomplish something great and big. And sometimes we miss the ability to connect and work together to achieve maybe that shared goal. So
I think you're right, Mike. Something you said about the why, why we're here, and we have our why, and we set that vision. But I had an employee tell me one time, Sue, when I came here, I didn't have kids. I was just looking for a job. And this job fit my skill set, and I'm on my career path, and it was just going to the next one. But coming here, you begin to find your why. It begins to make sense, and you figure out your sense of purpose and what you bring to the table. And setting that vision and helping them find their why really helps not only keep them engaged, but helps move the work forward.
Yeah. That's the inspirational part of this conversation, right? I mean, within both what you both have said, the what for all of us can get overwhelming and exhausting. And, it's heavy work in both of your organizations. we need that why, not only for some shared direction, but also for the inspiration factor, right? The motivation factor. Like, remember why we're here. Let's not just get bogged down in what we have to do.
Right. I think in the end, everybody, even if you're in the for-profit business, I think fundamentally we want to feel like we made a difference, right? We made a difference in our corner of the world, and we made our place a little better. And if you're in the for-profit sector, maybe you're trying to make more money for your shareholders or more money for but there's a why. And making sure that you're tuned into that is really essential.
Yeah, and our, again, within our large organization, our why, I mean, we have our mission, but promoting families and stability of families and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, right, we have to work different sort of feeding families, right? I have folks who their why is making sure families have food, others making sure children are safe. I have a whole group of family success coaches and employment and training folks who are making sure that families have employment, right? And but at the end of the day, right, it goes back to a family that is going to be stable and nurturing and safe for their children, right? So
yeah.
Well, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about community, right? I had a friend who works with senior resources, and I know I talk a lot, and she said, Sue, after I talk to you, I feel like I should go sign up and do something for kids. You just do so much, and I feel like I'm not doing my part. And I said, Patty, you are, chair of the board of the senior resources. And you're dealing with the old people, and that's your lane, and that's great because I'm not there. So I got this lane, you got that lane. If we all did something in our lane, it would be a better place for everybody. And I think we have to look at it that way: is really find your lane and lean in.
Yeah, Sue, it's interesting. Find your lane from an individual perspective. I mean, I think that's really well said and important. I'm fond of saying, everybody doesn't have to do everything, but everybody needs to do something.
Exactly.
Right? Everybody can find a lane, can find a place to contribute. At the same time, I'll spin that just a little bit to ask again, both of you, like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the diversity of things, not only that families need, but the diversity of, ideas, innovations, interventions that we need to be constantly creating and thinking of and doing things differently and new to meet rising challenges. I'm just wondering, sort of in your roles and in your organizations, the balance of sort of, well, we know exactly what to do and we just need to do more of it. And we also need to be constantly creating new solutions to meet new challenges. Seems like there's a lot of both of that happening at the same time. I take that journey with me, if you will. Like, how do we balance those two things?
I mean, so you have to have a balance of both things, right? Because I'm constantly trying to catch us up, right? And build the foundation so catching us up is doing all the things that maybe should have been done or could have been done, or how do we get to best practice just with the things that in the past, and at the same time build the foundation to be able to do some of the things that we think are going to be best for adults, children, families in the future. And so, you're looking at, policy work, advocacy work, just best practice quality case management, technology, right? The whole AI discussion is coming about how to use that to improve all of those things I just mentioned. And this is a field where we're constantly learning, right? I'll be honest, right? Like, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, the things that we thought maybe were right for children and families, you look back and you go, we may have been doing that a little wrong, right? So it's not like it's all very new and it's changing every day and you have to keep up with it. And that's federal law, that's state law, that's the research that's coming at different levels. So it's nonstop change. And you got to be, again, going back to, hey, let's build this strong foundation, let's catch up, but then also thinking about, this is how I want to see it in the future, and really trying to, you may not have the money or the resources now, right? But how do I get to that future, and what do we need to do to get to that point so I can keep moving this forward to be able to better help, folks early, like I said earlier, right? Have a nurturing environment where they're healthy and they're,
Yep.
you know, they're strong and they feel like they're doing everything they can.
I love it.
I think you're exactly right, Mike. You know, there's that saying people say all the time about we're building the plane as we're flying it, right? And so we're putting in all these pieces together, and we're not like building the car and driving, and if we fall down, we're still on the ground. We're flying, right? We are going fast and we're way up, and you know, where is the safety net? But I think the key, as you mentioned, is where are we going, right? And being able to be flexible and nimble enough that if we need to jettison a wing or a seat or whatever it is, or put more seats on as we're flying, but you're going with, you know, this direction of a South Carolina, or I'd like to say even a US that values children and families, and we make sure that families have the resources, not dictating what they need, but if people want to opt in or opt out, that's their choice, but they have choices. So many families don't have choices. And so how do we, as you know, Mike's organization, our organization, how do we make sure that in our lane, families have the choices, right? And how can we help them get there? And that we are bringing in community to make sure that those families have that. And so if we're bringing in community, then what needs to be on the plane is we're driving into the, you know, it just sort of one feeds into the other about how we get there.
Both of you really understand, right, that dynamic and are able to see it and in some ways predict the future. It's why I always am so excited whenever the phone rings and it's one of you on the other end saying, hey, let's work together on this thing, because it's exciting and it's new and it's challenging. At the same time, you're also up against and pushing against sort of systems and processes and mindsets that have been in place for decades, right? And a long time.
That's the hardest part. Because you see stuff where you get new information and people don't want to hear it. And I get change is hard, but you know, we have a saying in this world, you know, when you know better, you do better. We, as Mike said, you look back 10 years and what we did 20 years ago, and you look in medicine, you know, we don't leech people anymore, right? I mean, it's just we learn things, and we hope that we are moving beyond leeching out the evil spirits of, you know, we know better, right? But people really did that with the best intent, thinking that they were curing people. And so I think we need to think about, as we learn more, we do more, and do better. But it's just really hard to change old mindsets who don't have the resources that Mike and I have and our colleagues have of keeping up with data and research and new best practices. And so we have to tell them, and again and again, this is what needs to change.
Yeah, it's a constant, again, narrative of what we know now and how we're sharing that. And I mean, you beat your head up against the wall sometimes, right? Because you're like, hey, I've said this, right? And you know, you have to just keep doing that. You have to keep going, because again, if you have the information and the data saying this is what is wrong or what is right, let's either fix what is wrong or keep doing what is right, right? And that requires people to think outside the box, be innovative, creative, not stuck in what they think they know that may be right, which may not be at this point in time. You know, I look back at my career and I've gone, hey, you know, at that point in time, I thought it was the right decision. It wasn't, right? Based on what we know now.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to teach even the, you know, folks internally, right? The leadership, the folks who are leaders, is that, right? Like, you know, you can't get stuck in what you know now. Let's think about what the future is. Let me teach you about how you're going to make decisions, and they may be the wrong ones, or you know, we just got to keep moving forward. And right, this work is about learning and growing, and you know, trying to do things maybe a little bit different to maybe get the outcomes that you need.
You're creating that learning culture, Mike, is so important. You know, that especially in the work environment, we're not like trying a new recipe at home and the cake's going to fail and we just throw it in the trash. You know, these are people's work, and they want to feel like they're making a difference, and they're afraid of failure, afraid they're going to get fired. and they're not going to be able to feed their family in that whole trajectory. So you have to create this environment where it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them. That's the key part, is learning from your mistakes. And when you know better, you do better.
Yeah. That is a huge component of this, is creating that culture where you're constantly teaching and learning and growing and potentially making mistakes. The hard part about it though is some of the, again, we're within government, right? We have to deal with statutes and rules and laws and regulations and things like that, and not just state but federal. And there's some things that me and my folks we know is old, 1980, 1990 practice, but it's still built into regulation that's never been changed, or a law, right, at the federal level. And you go, we still have to do something we don't agree with because we know it's just outdated. Nobody's changed it. Now we can advocate and we can get with other states and other organizations and advocate for this, but it's really hard sometimes to change some of those things to get people to catch up. And so sometimes you're ultimately doing maybe bad practice, or you have to work around that practice to better help the family in a different way. Right.
Yeah. You might not know this, Mike, but you finished exactly on time, right as the 1,000 second buzzer was going off in my ear, literally. Well played. But I want to just sort of bring this all to a close. Sue, we're going to land the plane. You were talking about building a plane earlier. We're going to land the plane here in this conversation. Many of our listeners are other leaders. They run nonprofit organizations, social service organizations. Maybe they're in philanthropy, in community. If they're listening to this show, they're probably connected to the work of 1,000 Feathers in some way. In other words, all potential partners of yours, either at Children's Trust or DSS, or maybe current partners of yours. What do you need that group of folks to do, your current and potential future partners? What's your sort of call for help, as it were? What do you need that group of people to do to help you do your job better?
I think for me, and I get accused of being a big tent girl all the time, right? You'll bring anybody in. And I said, yes, I will bring anybody in if they want to do the work for children and families. And I think that's it, is I can always find a dotted line, a connection to how their work connects to ours, whether it's, and Mike said some of it too, whether it's birth to death, whether it's workforce, whether it's food and clothing, shelter, it's all about family, and everybody lives in a family somehow, somewhere. And if the family is good, then the rest of the family is going to be good, right? The children, the grandparents, the babies, everybody's going to be good. And so whatever lane people are working in, there's a connection to family. And I think we forget that it's not so, what's the word, disconnected as we might think. We got work over here, we got school over here, we got politics over here, it's really all connected, and we need to see ourselves as a one society, one community, and what you do over here affects me over here, whether I like it or not, it does. And so how can we be thoughtful about what we're doing and how it affects other people, even though you might not be dealing with kids like I am, or like Mike is. You might be doing something completely different. You might be running the bus system in your city, but I guarantee the bus system will affect the families that we work with.
I love it.
Everything's connected. Everything is connected. Now, sometimes we are all very disconnected, but if you're addressing one thing, it ultimately, hopefully, will affect the other parts of, family systems, better. But I think that I think we need to build stronger, just more equitable community engagement systems. And what that means is involve families and communities in decision making, right? Get input from them. Sue does, and their team do a tremendous job in that. Ensure that we understand we have a better sort of cultural competence in this work. Looking at our biases and our beliefs and the data around these things, I think is really important. And engaging again the communities in and them building and us building relationships with them, and then building relationships with us and within the community, and how we can address that community's need, and look for solutions that are rooted in the things that we've heard, right? And in their lived experiences and the voices. I think that is something that, kind of going back to Sue's earlier point, that maybe, you know, we got away from that stuff, right? Your families are all over in different places, right? And you lose those connections, and so you have to build new community connections, and we're so spread out these days, and you know, people are, you know, we just have to continue to figure out how to work together better.
Yeah.
And
I
there's
wrote
some-
down here. Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Sue.
I was just going to say to your point, Mike, that I want to put an exclamation point to, and respect others' viewpoints, right? That you may go to a different church. You might go to church on Saturday and I go on Sunday. Somebody else might go on Friday. But it's okay, right? And you might not go to church, and that's okay too. But we all have to live together, and we walk down the same streets, and we all want them to be safe, and we want our, you know, places to be clean, and look for those commonalities instead of the things that divide us.
Yeah. Thank you both so much for being with us. Mike, I wrote a note: stronger, more equitable community engagement. If we do a part 2 of this conversation, which is very likely, we're going to focus right there. We could do a whole episode on that topic. I appreciate you raising it. Thank you both so much for agreeing to be with us and lending your thoughts and expertise. Took some, as I said, creative liberties with the 1,000 seconds, probably closer to 2, but we had 2 guests today, so I think it's okay. We'll see you all next time on 1,000 Seconds. Mike, Sue, thanks a lot. Good to be reconnected.
Thanks, Forrest.
Thanks, Forrest.
See you guys.